Othram was able to successfully extract DNA from the bones we had sent them.
Othram Labs was able to obtain a DNA profile.
The technology is starting to spread like wildfire.
Seeing the lab itself is astounding, but it's what happens after the lab work is done at Othram that brings purpose to Dr. Kristen Middleman.
These are stories that they're not fictional, they're real.
In a matter of several years, they've gone from being a subject of skepticism to now working the most notable cases, like the Gilgo Beach murders and suspect Rex Heuermann.
We help with the Long Island serial killer. That's a big buzz right now as the trial goes on. A few years ago, when Othram started, this technology would have never been used for these types of cases, especially these contemporary investigations.
But Othram proved their technology worked, solving some of the most gripping cold cases in the United States, like Arizona's Little Miss Nobody.
Little Miss Nobody is a case where the extreme heat affected the DNA in those bones.
A little girl buried in a shallow grave in the desert in 1960, with remains nobody could build a DNA profile from, until Othram did, identifying her in 2022 as 4-year-old Sharon Lee Gallegos from New Mexico, who was kidnapped from her front yard.
Little Miss Nobody had no hope of getting her case solved as Little Miss Nobody. And no one should ever be Little Miss Nobody, or any of these Jane Doe or John Doe names that are out there, right?
And it's these cases and these kinds of victims where Othram has not only uncovered answers, but details so sinister that have been schemed and hidden for decades.
I think she was known as Beth Doe. We identified her as Evelyn Cologne. She was a young girl, pregnant, chopped into pieces and thrown at the bottom of a lake in suitcases. Law enforcement said, well, she's not even missing. They contacted her family and they said, are you missing someone? And they said, no. And they said, well, can you account for Evelyn? And they said, yeah, she sends us letters. She just had a baby. She's living, in this state. They were like, have you seen her? And the answer was no. The perpetrator was sending letters home. The perpetrator was actually a taxi cab driver in the New York area, and now he's in court for this crime.
That wasn't the only case of deception that Othram's work brought to light.
We worked the Opelika Jane Doe case out of Alabama. The skeleton was between 3 and 6 years old when she was found. She was brutally abused and bones were broken at different times, over 15 fractures. She was under a riverbed, so the DNA was horrible. She was malnourished. She had no teeth.
Incredibly, they were able to build a DNA profile and identified her remains as Amori Wiggins.
And first it led to the father who said, oh no, I don't have a child. I don't know anything about this.
So they used genealogy to find Amori's mother.
She had lost custody of her daughter. She was 19. He was much older. He was Navy. He was married. This was a child out of wedlock. The court thought that the child was safer with him. She was still paying child support to the father because she thought her daughter was still alive.
A police investigation found the unthinkable about the man who claimed he didn't have a daughter.
He brutally beat that child and killed her and continued to collect child support for 11 years after that. He confessed to murder. As a mother, that case got to me in a way that I can't describe.
There's one case in particular that stays front of mind for Middleman, a case that seemed unsolvable in Texas, with an unexpected link across the country.
Sherry Ann Jarvis, she was the Walker County Jane Doe. People knew her because this was one of the most horrific crimes against a child. Her body was found on Halloween Day, but she was mutilated so much that she was unrecognizable. She was found dumped on the side of a Texas highway. There were no remains left by the time that we got involved in this case.
All they had was a small slide left from the autopsy that had a tiny amount of human tissue on it treated with chemicals.
And so that's all that was left. Well, formaldehyde is a chemical that treats DNA by cross-linking it. No one in the world had ever been able to sequence after something was treated with formaldehyde, and that's something we put on pause. We worked diligently for almost a year on the research side of the lab with mock casework, mock DNA, to try to be able to work with that kind of input until we could. Then we moved it over to the forensic side of the lab and were able to give Sherry her name back. Now the investigators are working diligently on identifying her perpetrator. Sherry's family was from Michigan. They've been looking for her forever, and all of these years, and there was no link between Texas and Sherry in Michigan. Without this technology, her family would have continued to never have answers.
Now, Othram has gone worldwide, making identifications in Canada, Australia, the UK, and other places in Europe. Not only are victims getting their names back, but suspects are getting caught faster than ever.
We have a crime out of South Carolina. When we identified him, it linked to 12 other crimes. We have one in Maine, it linked to 6 other crimes.
It begs the question, is this the end of serial killers for good?
We can't stop someone from being a perpetrator, right? We all know that. But if they could get caught the first time, we would all live in a much better world. And I think it's coming.
And Brianna's with us now, back from Texas, to explain more about this. So I would assume this place is in really high demand from police departments all over the country. What's the process? How do they choose which cases to take on?
I mean, they're taking on so many. We talked about this in part 1, but in 2019, they made 5 identifications. Now in 2023, they've made over 1,200.
Wow.
So it's a
cow.
wild how much they've scaled. So their team has also expanded as well. I watched a femur be taken out from the evidence room. They got DNA off of it, and they already started DNA extraction. It can happen so quickly, and that's because they've upped their technology level to be able to accommodate that. So if they can't, what you saw there with Sherry Ann Jarvis's case, if the DNA is so degraded that even their technology can't, they'll put it on hold, but they won't give it back. They say, we're gonna figure this out, but our engineers are going to work on the technology to be able to do that, and then they'll come back and try to solve it. But they only have one shot to do this because it destroys the DNA by the end of the process. So that's why they'll put it on hold. They don't want to mess up, and they want to be sure that they can make an identification. So they're taking on cases from all over because they can.
And these women, these victims, they're getting their names back. I liked how you said that a couple times, and you just can't help but think of their families and what they've been through and getting some kind of justice and answer.
And I think a lot of those families thought that day would never come. I mean, these are decades old, and you didn't know what the technology would be. We knew DNA was up and coming. We knew it was going to change the game forensically. But Othram, I mean, they're taking a medical background and changing that and adapting that to be a forensic technology that most other people can't do. So it is a really special time for these families who thought, I may die without having these answers. And it does beg that question, is this the end of serial killers? If they can identify people so quickly with the tiniest amount of DNA, we're talking 15 human cells. That's what they've been able to do. That's not even a fingerprint. Yeah. If you do this, she said that's about 100 cells right there.
Wow.
So people are getting caught at rapid pace now.
Are they working on any Arizona cases that you know of?
Yes. Yes.
And did they tell you which cases
Several.
those are? Are they cold cases, current cases? What are they doing?
They're cold cases. I know for a fact that there are several cases they're working with outside of Mojave County as well as with Yavapai County. There are a couple high-profile ones that I know they have the DNA from, but for the most part, they're not able to talk about it. I know some of this kind of off the record behind the scenes. But what they're doing, if they are able to make identifications in these cases that we're talking about, especially from Yavapai, these are cases that the public knows.
Yeah.
And it would be a really big deal to solve those.
It's a lot of hope for a lot of families and also the detectives who may have worked on these cases for so many years and can't let them go. A lot of hope all around. Interesting stuff. Interesting work. Brianna, thanks.
Thanks.